She was the last queen of Henry VIII, the one who survived. But behind that simple label lies a story far richer and more complex. A tale of intellect, resilience, and quiet rebellion in a world where queens were expected to smile, obey, and bleed for heirs. Catherine Parr's life is often reduced to a footnote in the saga of England's most notorious king. But make no mistake, she was no passive survivor. She was a published author, a political operator, a stepmother to a future queen, and a woman of deep faith who walked a perilous line between devotion and defiance. Imagine a young woman widowed twice before the age of 30, who never imagined being queen, and then found herself married to an aging, volatile king known for sending wives to the executioner's block. How do you survive such a fate? Catherine didn't just survive. She quietly reshaped the Tudor court from within. She helped reintroduce the princesses Mary and Elizabeth into royal favor. She educated herself in Latin and Greek, and she wrote theological works that sparked conversations across Europe. She did all this while dodging the very real threat of arrest, or worse, for her outspoken Protestant beliefs. Catherine Parr's story isn't just about a woman caught in the shadow of a tyrant. It's about a woman who used that shadow to cast a light of her own. In a world that denied women the power to rule, she ruled minds and hearts with her pen, her prayers, and her patience. And perhaps most remarkably, she helped shape the future Elizabeth I, not with decrees or armies, but with books, ideas, and unwavering encouragement. Without Catherine, the Virgin Queen might have been lost to history. But her triumph came at a price. After years of service and sacrifice, she finally married for love, and it led her to a tragic end. She died shortly after giving birth to her only child, her life ending just as it seemed to truly begin. Her daughter vanished from the records. Her final resting place lies in the quiet ruins of Sudeley Castle, far from the noise of Henry's court. Yet her voice still echoes, in words, in legacies, and in the enduring reign of a queen who carried her lessons into history. Welcome to my channel. In this video, we'll explore the remarkable journey of Catherine Parr, the sixth and final wife of Henry VIII. We'll uncover the truth behind the phrase she survived, break down her secret power at court, explore her dangerous flirtation with heresy, and reveal how she became an early voice for women in religion and literature. We'll also examine her relationship with Princess Elizabeth, her tragic final love story, and why Catherine Parr deserves so much more than a closing chapter in someone else's tale. So stay with me, and let's bring history back to life, one queen at a time. In the early 16th century, England stood on the edge of immense transformation. The reign of King Henry VIII, who came to the throne in the year 1509, would go on to reshape the religious, political, and social structure of the nation forever. At the beginning of the century, England remained a firmly Catholic country, closely aligned with the authority of the Pope in Rome and deeply rooted in medieval traditions. Yet beneath this outward stability, subtle but powerful currents of change were already stirring. The Renaissance had swept through much of continental Europe, sparking fresh ideas about art, science, and governance. Meanwhile, the early whispers of religious reform had begun to circulate, and though England was initially resistant, it would not remain untouched for long. Within this shifting landscape, Henry VIII's marriages became far more than personal unions. They were defining political and religious events that helped shape the destiny of the entire kingdom. Each marriage was a reflection of the king's broader ambitions, frustrations, and insecurities. His first union with Catherine of Aragon laid the groundwork for an explosive break with the Catholic Church, prompted by his desperate quest for a male heir and his passionate desire for Anne Boleyn. This break would lead to the creation of the Church of England and a seismic shift in the country's religious identity. The pattern of Henry's subsequent marriages, each one deeply entangled with both personal desire and political calculation, revealed the volatile nature of power at court. The fates of his 6 wives, divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived, have fascinated generations and symbolized the perils of royal intimacy and the fragility of a queen's position. Henry's obsession with producing a male successor to secure the Tudor dynasty influenced nearly every major decision he made. Yet his marriages also served as a mirror of the broader societal upheavals taking place. They exposed evolving ideas about female agency, religious transformation, and the limits of absolute monarchy. They revealed how personal longing and political strategy often collided, with devastating consequences for those closest to the throne. Every woman who married Henry did so at extraordinary personal risk, and each brought her own distinct qualities and impact to the ever-changing dynamics of Tudor rule. It is within this complex and perilous world that the story of Catherine Parr takes shape, a story that is often overshadowed by the scandal and drama surrounding her predecessors, but no less vital to understanding the era. Unlike the earlier wives, Catherine did not come to Henry as a young, inexperienced girl. By the time she entered the royal court, she had already lived through 2 marriages and had been widowed twice. She knew sorrow, survival, and the need for careful diplomacy in a treacherous political landscape. Her appeal to Henry, who by then was aging, plagued by illness, and increasingly mistrustful, did not rest on youthful beauty or naivete. Instead, she offered calm intelligence, maturity, and a composed strength that the king had come to value deeply. Catherine Parr's significance lies far beyond the fact that she outlived Henry VIII. She was not a passive bystander in the face of monumental change, but an active figure who left her own mark on the era. As queen, she navigated the shifting politics of the Tudor court with discretion and foresight. She worked behind the scenes to reunite Henry's fractured family, his children Mary, Elizabeth, and Edward, helping to secure their futures and their places in the royal succession. These efforts would have lasting consequences, leading ultimately to the successive reigns of Edward VI, Mary I, and the iconic Elizabeth I. Through her relationships with these future monarchs, Catherine Parr helped shape the course of English history. Her influence on the English Reformation was equally profound. Catherine was a committed supporter of the Protestant cause at a time when such views were dangerous and could be construed as treason. She surrounded herself with reformist thinkers, promoted the study and translation of the Bible into English, and used her position to support religious scholarship. Her own writings, Prayers or Meditations and the Lamentation of a Sinner, were groundbreaking not only for their theological insights, but also as early examples of female authorship. Catherine Parr became the first Queen of England to publish a book under her own name, an extraordinary achievement in a society that so often stifled women's voices. Her survival at court is, in itself, a testament to her exceptional political skill and inner strength. When conservative factions, alarmed by her outspoken Protestant views, attempted to bring charges of heresy against her, Catherine's life hung in the balance. A warrant for her arrest was reportedly issued, and for a time she teetered on the edge of destruction. Yet through swift humility, calculated submission, and deep understanding of Henry's volatile temperament, she was able to defuse the crisis, avoid arrest, and retain her position as queen. It was a harrowing episode that showcased her intelligence, poise, and ability to navigate the deadly politics of the Tudor court. But Catherine's endurance was not merely a personal victory. It represented something far greater: the resilience of a woman operating within a system designed to deny her agency. In an age when queens could be discarded, disgraced, or executed at the whim of the king, Catherine Parr not only survived but thrived. She governed in Henry's absence, championed religious reform, authored influential works, and used her position to protect and shape the future of the realm. Her story defies the simplistic narrative of passive queens and helpless wives. Catherine was neither a victim nor a footnote. She was a force in her own right. This examination of her life is not merely the tale of the last wife who managed to outlive a dangerous husband. It is the story of a woman who carved out influence in a world stacked against her, who refused to remain silent, and who contributed meaningfully to the intellectual and spiritual currents of her time. From noblewoman to twice-widowed courtier, from queen consort to regent and published author, Catherine Parr's life stands as a powerful portrait of courage, insight, and quiet but effective leadership. By understanding Catherine Parr, we gain a deeper appreciation for the challenges and possibilities that existed for women in Tudor England. Her story urges us to move beyond the cliched list of Henry's 6 wives and instead recognize each woman's individual contribution, especially Catherine, whose enduring strength and thoughtful governance helped lay the foundation for a modernizing nation. Catherine Parr was not merely the 6th wife of Henry VIII. She was a queen who ruled with discernment in the king's absence, a writer who boldly published in her own name, a reformer who risked her safety for her faith, and a survivor whose legacy reaches far beyond her lifetime. Her life, shaped by intelligence, conviction, and tenacity, deserves to be told as a central and powerful chapter in the history of Tudor England, not as an ending, but as a beginning. Catherine Parr, born in the year 1512, entered a world steeped in lineage, loyalty, and legacy. From the beginning, She bore the weight of noble ancestry. Her bloodline connected her not only to some of England's most prominent families, but also to the very heart of courtly life. The Parr family, with its distinguished heritage, traced its roots deep into the northern English nobility. Her father, Sir Thomas Parr of Kendal, was a knight of notable standing and a respected courtier during the reign of King Henry VIII. Her mother, Maud Green, came from a well-established family and served as a lady-in-waiting to Catherine of Aragon, the first wife of Henry VIII. Through both her paternal and maternal lines, Catherine Parr was intimately connected to the forces of power and privilege that shaped English aristocracy. The early 16th century was a time when proximity to the royal court could determine the fate of entire families. Catherine's lineage guaranteed that she was born into an environment immersed in the language, customs, and expectations of court life. This connection was not just a matter of status. It was a vital avenue for security, influence, and advancement. The court of England operated as a labyrinth of alliances and rivalries, where marriages, patronage, and personal relationships dictated one's future. In this world, the Parr family's prominence granted Catherine not only a stable foundation, but also an invaluable education in diplomacy, strategy, and presentation. Even as a child, she would have understood the gravity of her heritage and the duties it entailed. The death of her father during her early years had a lasting impact on Catherine's upbringing. Responsibility for her education and development fell to her mother, Maud Green. Unlike many women of the period, Maud placed tremendous value on education, not just for her son, William, but also for her daughters, Catherine and Anne. As a result, Catherine Parr received an exceptional education for a woman of her time. While most girls were taught little beyond household management and basic literacy, Catherine studied an impressive curriculum that included languages, theology, literature, history, and the arts. She became fluent in Latin and gained competence in both French and Italian. Her aptitude for languages would later serve her well as both an author and an intellectual. Her theological studies would come to define her beliefs and actions as queen. Influenced by the humanist ideals of the Renaissance, which emphasized classical learning, moral integrity, and critical thought, Catherine was encouraged not merely to absorb facts, but to engage deeply with ideas, to reason, and to express herself with clarity. This advanced intellectual preparation was exceedingly rare for women of her time and placed her in a distinct league among her contemporaries. Maud Green's influence on Catherine cannot be overstated. As a widowed noblewoman charged with securing her family's future, Maud exemplified strength, foresight, and dignity, qualities that Catherine would emulate throughout her life. Her mother's position at court offered Catherine a living example of how to navigate the treacherous world of royal service. It also introduced her to a network of connections that would prove invaluable in the years ahead. Through her mother's guidance, Catherine learned the importance of discretion, loyalty, and adaptability, virtues that would become her greatest assets in the uncertain world of Tudor politics. From a young age, Catherine displayed a remarkable blend of intelligence, calm, and resilience. These traits were not simply inherent. They were honed by the expectations placed upon her and the demanding environment in which she was raised. Her intellectual gifts extended beyond her academic accomplishments. She possessed emotional intelligence, an ability to read people, anticipate change, and manage complex relationships with poise. In a court where favor could rise and fall in an instant, her early mastery of self-control became one of her most valuable traits. She knew when to speak, when to remain silent, when to assert herself, and when to retreat, instincts that would later help her survive and thrive in the most perilous of royal circles. Catherine's resilience was tested early by personal loss and familial responsibility. The death of her father left her family without its patriarch, placing greater demands on Catherine and her siblings. Although she grew up in comfort relative to most of English society, the burdens of upholding family honor, securing strategic marriages, and navigating the volatile politics of court life were ever present. From an early age, Catherine demonstrated an extraordinary ability to endure adversity without losing her sense of self. Her capacity to adapt to shifting circumstances while maintaining her integrity would become one of the defining features of her later life, particularly during periods of religious and political upheaval. In addition to her intellect and inner strength, Catherine possessed a grace and warmth that endeared her to those around her. Though she was not celebrated for her physical beauty in the same way some of Henry VIII's other wives were, She exuded a quiet dignity and charm that won admiration. These qualities, when paired with her sharp mind and steady character, made her an ideal companion, not only for a king but for many of the influential figures who would come to rely on her counsel and friendship. Her early years also fostered a deep and enduring sense of duty toward her family, her faith, and her country. This devotion would become a guiding principle throughout her life. Catherine did not merely seek to endure. She sought to serve, to lead, and to leave behind a legacy of purpose and integrity. This sense of mission, cultivated from childhood, would later fuel her support for religious reform, her sponsorship of the arts, and her groundbreaking work as an author of devotional texts. In every sense, Catherine Parr's early life prepared her for the extraordinary role she would come to play. Born into nobility, equipped with a rare education, and shaped by the wisdom and strength of her mother, she emerged as a woman uniquely qualified for leadership and influence. Her deep understanding of her place within the rigid hierarchy of Tudor society did not limit her. It empowered her. She used that knowledge not merely to survive but to thrive, shaping a life of extraordinary significance. Her intelligence, poise, and strength, evident from an early age, became the very tools that allowed her to navigate the dangers of the Tudor court and make a lasting mark on English history. These early experiences laid the groundwork for her future as queen, regent, reformer, and survivor. Catherine Parr would not be remembered merely as the final wife of Henry VIII, but as a woman of exceptional courage, compassion, and consequence, a figure whose influence continues to resonate across the centuries. Catherine Parr's entry into married life began during her teenage years, launching her into a journey marked by personal hardship, political entanglements, and the quiet development of remarkable resilience. Her first marriage was to Sir Edward Berg, a member of a once prominent but now declining noble family. Contrary to many popular misconceptions, Edward was not an elderly man, as he is sometimes portrayed, but rather close in age to Catherine. The union, however, was not founded on love but arranged for strategic advantage, an entirely common practice of the time. Through this match, Catherine entered a complicated and at times repressive household, one that required her to quickly develop the diplomatic skills and composed strength that would later become the cornerstones of her public life. The Berg household was dominated by Sir Thomas Berg, Edward's grandfather, a notoriously authoritarian and difficult man. His unrelenting control over family affairs and the household created a tense and oppressive environment for Catherine. As a young bride, she found herself not only learning the customs of marriage, but also contending with the stifling demands of a patriarch whose rigid oversight left little space for personal freedom. The manor at Gainsborough, where the Berg family resided, was remote, cold, and austere, far removed from the vibrant, cultivated circles of the royal court that Catherine had occasionally glimpsed in her youth. Life at Gainsborough offered little outlet for her intellectual energy or spirited nature. Edward Berg's health, both physical and mental, was fragile. Although the historical record remains unclear, it is widely believed that he suffered from chronic illness, a circumstance that further isolated Catherine and added strain to the household. Their marriage produced no children, possibly due to Edward's ill health. It was during this early period of adulthood that Catherine developed a strong capacity for patience, endurance, and careful discretion, qualities that would later prove critical in navigating the far more perilous challenges of court life. Edward's death came relatively early, around the year 1533, leaving Catherine a widow in her early 20s. Widowhood in Tudor England was a precarious but sometimes liberating state. It carried the danger of financial instability and social exclusion, but also granted a woman a degree of freedom that was otherwise rare. After Edward's death, Catherine did not remain unattached for long. Now, with some experience in managing estates and maneuvering through family politics, she made a second marriage that elevated her social status and deepened her engagement with national affairs. She became the wife of John Neville, the third Baron Latimer, a nobleman of significant influence in the north of England. This marriage marked a substantial rise in social standing for Catherine. Neville was a widower with 2 children, and although the match likely began as a pragmatic alliance, there is evidence that a deep mutual respect, and perhaps genuine affection, developed between the couple. Life in the north of England introduced Catherine to a world that was politically and socially distinct from the southern court. The Latimer estates were substantial, and Catherine assumed the demanding role of managing these lands and raising her stepchildren. Her responsibilities expanded beyond the domestic realm. As the wife of a northern baron, she found herself immersed in the volatile politics of the region, where tensions between the crown and local powers were a constant undercurrent. These tensions erupted into full rebellion in the year 1536 with the Pilgrimage of Grace, a massive popular uprising sparked by King Henry VIII's dissolution of the monasteries and other religious reforms. The rebellion proved a dangerous and defining moment in Catherine's life. Her husband was caught in a difficult position, torn between loyalty to the king and sympathy for the rebels, many of whom were his neighbors and allies. Although Neville ultimately chose to support the crown, suspicions about his true loyalties would linger for years. During this period, Catherine and her stepchildren were taken hostage by the rebels at Snape Castle, their home in Yorkshire. It was a harrowing experience that required all of Catherine's inner strength and composure. She managed to safeguard herself and her family through diplomacy, prudence, and an unshakable calm under pressure. This ordeal thrust her into a position of leadership at a critical moment and sharpened her understanding of the unpredictable nature of Tudor politics. It was during this time that Catherine demonstrated a political instinct and resolve that would later serve her as queen. Though the Latimer family survived the rebellion, they remained under royal suspicion for years. Catherine resumed her responsibilities, overseeing the estates and continuing to raise her stepchildren. Her reputation for effective household management and compassionate leadership continued to grow. But the death of John Neville in the year 1543 once again left her a widow, this time with more political experience, but also facing significant financial and legal challenges. Her second widowhood brought economic uncertainty. Neville's death left her with a complex estate to manage and several outstanding debts. Legally, Catherine had few rights, and her future depended on male relatives and royal favor. Nevertheless, she proved resourceful. Drawing upon her growing network of influential allies and her reputation for competence and prudence, she managed to stabilize her position. Still, these were uncertain years, marked by insecurity and personal grief. Emotionally, Catherine was deeply affected by Neville's death. Though their marriage may have begun as a matter of strategy, it grew into a relationship grounded in respect and perhaps even affection. Letters from this period portray a woman of great loyalty and feeling, traits often overlooked by those who focus solely on her public and political roles. This capacity for deep emotional connection would later emerge in her relationship with Thomas Seymour, the man she loved most passionately. Financially, she was again in a vulnerable position. As a widow, her independence was limited by law and custom. She turned to the royal court for protection, entering the orbit of Henry VIII not long after Neville's death. This was both a practical and strategic move. Access to the court opened possibilities for advancement, influence, and security that were otherwise unavailable to a woman of her station. During this period, Catherine's religious convictions also began to deepen. She increasingly embraced the reformist ideas that were slowly gaining traction across England. This spiritual evolution would come to define her later actions and her legacy as queen. It also gave her a profound sense of purpose and inner strength during a time of great uncertainty. The combination of personal loss, political intrigue, and financial responsibility transformed Catherine into a woman of exceptional strength and clarity. She emerged from her first two marriages not diminished but strengthened, her mind sharpened, her instincts honed, and her character tested. No longer the inexperienced bride who had once entered the Berg household, she had become a woman of considerable influence, resilience, and insight. These qualities would soon catch the attention of King Henry VIII himself, propelling her into the most prominent and dangerous role of her life. In many ways, Catherine's earlier experiences served as a proving ground for the challenges she would later face as queen. She had already learned how to run large and complex households, how to survive political storms, and how to walk the fine line between personal integrity and public expectation. She understood what it meant to be loyal and what it took to endure. Her early life also instilled in her a deep empathy for others, especially women facing similar struggles. This compassion would later shape her efforts to support education, publish religious literature, and guide the children of Henry VIII with kindness and foresight. Catherine Parr's first two marriages were far more than footnotes in her biography. They were the foundation upon which her greatness was built, shaping her into one of the most remarkable women of the Tudor age. After the death of John Neville, 3rd Baron Latimer, Catherine Parr found herself at a critical crossroads. She was once again a widow, now twice bereaved, but no longer the inexperienced young woman who had married Sir Edward Berg years earlier. Catherine had matured through hardship and responsibility and now possessed a keen understanding of both personal and political survival. Her connections through marriage and her growing reputation for intelligence and virtue positioned her for a return to a world she had long observed from a distance, the royal court. In the aftermath of her second widowhood, Catherine made the strategic decision to leave the north of England and re-enter court life. The political center of Tudor England was where decisions were made, where fortunes were lost and won, and where, for a woman of Catherine's circumstances, opportunities awaited those with the wit and caution to seize them. Unlike many women who had fallen into poverty following the deaths of their husbands, Catherine was determined not to fade into obscurity. She moved to London, likely with the aim of securing a place within one of the royal households, either through service or remarriage. Her return to court was facilitated by her personal connections and her noble background. Catherine had always been aligned with families loyal to the crown, and her own reputation was spotless. She was soon appointed to Princess Mary's household, a significant and prestigious position. Mary, the daughter of Henry VIII and his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, had endured years of personal and political turmoil due to her father's marital decisions and religious reforms. Her court was a gathering place for those who remained sympathetic to the old Catholic traditions and to the memory of Catherine of Aragon. Catherine Parr's appointment to Mary's household was both a testament to her character and a key opportunity to position herself within a circle that still wielded considerable influence. In the service of Princess Mary, Catherine's warmth, education, and empathy quickly distinguished her. She and Mary shared a strong bond, likely strengthened by Catherine's own deep piety and her familiarity with the hardships that accompanied political life. Catherine's ability to navigate delicate religious and political matters with subtlety made her a trusted figure within Mary's circle. She provided Mary with companionship, support, and perhaps most importantly, a model of survival through adversity. Their relationship would remain important throughout Catherine's life, especially later when political fortunes continued to shift violently. While serving Mary, Catherine expanded her network at court. She met and formed connections with a range of influential figures, many of whom were themselves navigating the uncertain waters of Henry VIII's increasingly volatile reign. Catherine's position allowed her to meet men and women of significant stature, including courtiers, clerics, and noblemen who recognized her intelligence and discretion. She quickly became known for her modesty, grace, and keen mind, qualities that, at a time when the king's court was rife with intrigue and ambition, made her stand out without drawing dangerous levels of attention. Among those she encountered was Thomas Seymour, the brother of the late Queen Jane Seymour, Henry VIII's third wife. Thomas was handsome, ambitious, and very aware of his own charms. There was mutual attraction between Catherine and Thomas, and some evidence suggests that a romantic understanding between them was beginning to develop. However, the volatile nature of life at court, combined with the enormous influence wielded by the Seymour family, made any potential match between Catherine and Thomas a matter of political calculation rather than pure affection. Catherine was wise enough to understand the stakes involved, and she tread carefully, even as her feelings deepened. As Catherine moved more securely within the court's inner circles, she inevitably came to the attention of King Henry VIII himself. By this time, Henry was aging and ailing. His physical health was deteriorating, plagued by leg ulcers, obesity, and the lingering consequences of earlier injuries, and his temper was infamously mercurial. His marital history was notorious. 6 wives in total, 2 executed, 2 divorced, and 1 who had died giving him his long-sought male heir. Despite the dangers inherent in royal favor, for a woman at court, Henry's attention could represent the ultimate elevation in status, provided it was managed with extreme caution. Henry's interest in Catherine seems to have been genuine and rooted in admiration for her character rather than mere physical attraction. Catherine's learnedness, her religious devotion, and her steady temperament appealed to the king in ways that younger and more coquettish courtiers could not. She represented the virtues of loyalty, piety, and stability that Henry, perhaps subconsciously, desired after years of tumultuous personal relationships. Catherine, meanwhile, was faced with a staggering decision: whether to pursue the private affection she held for Thomas Seymour or to accept the attention and potential proposal of the King of England. Her choice was not truly a choice at all. In the tightly controlled environment of Henry's court, where the king's will was law, to refuse the king's advances would have been unthinkable and perilous. Catherine's religious devotion, her sense of duty, and her political savvy guided her decision to accept Henry's attentions. In doing so, she not only protected herself but also secured a platform from which she could promote her reformist religious ideas, albeit carefully and within the confines of royal favor. The period during which Henry courted Catherine was marked by a subtle but important transformation in her life. She shifted from the role of a peripheral courtier to that of a central figure in the king's household. Catherine moved among the highest-ranking members of the court, attended official ceremonies, and participated in the social rituals that underpinned Tudor political life. She maintained her modesty and religious devotion, projecting an image of ideal queenship even before any formal announcement was made. Through her relationship with Henry, Catherine gained an unprecedented level of influence. She was able to advocate for scholars, promote religious works aligned with her views, and offer patronage to reform-minded clerics and writers. Yet she did so with the utmost care, aware that Henry's religious policies, while favoring reform in some areas, were inconsistent and could swing violently depending on political expediency. Catherine's ability to balance her personal convictions with the need to maintain royal favor was a testament to her intelligence and political acumen. Catherine's growing favor with the king also increased her visibility and, with it, the envy and resentment of others at court. In the highly competitive environment of Tudor politics, any elevation was viewed with suspicion and jealousy. Rivals watched her carefully, ready to exploit any misstep. Catherine's survival and eventual marriage to Henry would depend on her continuing ability to manage the treacherous undercurrents of court life, balancing ambition with humility, religious devotion with political necessity, and personal feeling with public duty. As Henry's courtship progressed, Catherine prepared herself for a role that would demand all the skills she had honed throughout her life. She would not be a queen in the mold of Anne Boleyn, dazzling but divisive, nor would she be a passive figure like Jane Seymour. Catherine envisioned a queenship that combined moral leadership with political savvy, offering Henry the companionship and stability he so desperately sought. In doing so, she carved out a unique place for herself in the annals of Tudor history, a place she would solidify through her actions in the tumultuous years ahead. Thus, Catherine Parr, twice widowed and seasoned by hardship, found herself standing on the threshold of becoming queen. Her return to court, her service to Princess Mary, her careful cultivation of alliances, and her composed acceptance of the king's attention all coalesced into a remarkable transformation. From the quiet halls of Snape Castle to the glittering corridors of the royal palaces, Catherine's journey was not just one of personal advancement, but also one of survival, principle, and emerging influence in one of the most dangerous courts in European history. Catherine Parr's rise from court widow to Queen of England was neither simple nor straightforward. At the time of King Henry VIII's growing interest in her, Catherine found herself trapped between personal desire and political necessity. Her heart had already begun to incline toward Thomas Seymour, a charming and ambitious courtier whose attentions had not gone unnoticed. Thomas, the brother of Jane Seymour, the late queen who had given Henry his longed-for male heir, was handsome, persuasive, and very much alive in the ambitions of his family. Catherine and Thomas shared mutual affection, and perhaps in another life, free from royal commands and courtly intrigue, they might have married for love alone. But the court of Henry VIII was not a place where personal feelings could be freely followed. Catherine understood the weight of the king's favor. To refuse Henry, even on the grounds of prior affection, was not only impractical, it was dangerous. Henry VIII was not a man accustomed to denial, and although his interest in Catherine seemed grounded in admiration rather than sheer lust, rejection could have had grave consequences for her, her family, and even Thomas Seymour himself. Catherine, with her keen intelligence and deep understanding of survival at court, realized that she could not follow her heart without risking everything. King Henry's pursuit of Catherine was both swift and commanding. Despite his declining health and volatile temper, Henry remained every inch the monarch, and his attentions were impossible to resist. He lavished Catherine with gifts and courtesies, treating her with a tenderness that he had not often shown to his previous wives. For Henry, Catherine represented not only personal comfort in his old age, but also a stabilizing influence. She was pious without being overbearing, intelligent without being threatening, and attractive in a way that spoke more to her grace and composure than to youthful beauty. Catherine's reluctance was real, but it was buried under layers of political obligation and personal caution. In the spring of 1543, Henry proposed marriage and Catherine, with no real alternative, accepted. It is possible that she took comfort in the belief that her union with the king might enable her to act as a force for good at court, promoting religious reform and providing stability for the king's children. Whatever her private sorrows over abandoning Thomas Seymour, Catherine moved forward with dignity and resolve. On July 12, 1543, Catherine Parr became the sixth wife of Henry VIII in a quiet ceremony at Hampton Court Palace. The marriage was witnessed only by a small group of courtiers, a contrast to the grand public spectacles that had accompanied some of Henry's earlier unions. Catherine wore a gown of rich satin and damask, reflecting her new status but also signaling a certain sobriety befitting a woman who approached the role of queen not as a fairy tale, but as a solemn duty. She was about 30 years old at the time, neither too young nor too old by the standards of the day, but already wise far beyond her years. Adjusting to life as queen consort was both a challenge and a balancing act. Catherine understood immediately that she would be measured against the memories of Henry's previous wives. She needed to embody the virtue and loyalty of Catherine of Aragon, the sweetness and motherhood of Jane Seymour, the charisma of Anne Boleyn, but without the fatal boldness, and the obedience that Henry demanded above all. Her success would depend on her ability to navigate not only the king's volatile moods, but also the dangerous currents of court politics, where factions vied for influence and enemies lurked in every shadow. One of Catherine's first priorities as queen was to mend the fractured royal family. Henry's relationships with his children had been severely damaged by his marital upheavals and religious policies. Catherine took it upon herself to bring a semblance of domestic harmony to the royal household. She showed genuine affection toward Princess Mary and Prince Edward and treated Princess Elizabeth with particular kindness, recognizing the brilliance and potential of the young girl. Catherine's efforts were successful enough that Henry formally returned both Mary and Elizabeth to the line of succession, after they had previously been declared illegitimate. Beyond the domestic sphere, Catherine wielded considerable political influence, albeit subtly. She was a strong supporter of the English Reformation and the advancement of Protestant ideals, although she practiced discretion in her advocacy. Catherine was careful never to appear radical. Instead, she framed her religious interests in the language of personal piety and education, promoting the idea that women, too, could engage in theological study. She encouraged the publication of religious works in English and supported scholars and clerics aligned with reformist views. Catherine herself would later publish religious texts, a remarkable achievement for a queen and one that reflected both her intellect and her courage. Yet Catherine's position was far from secure. Court politics during Henry's later years were treacherous, as powerful factions battled for dominance. The conservative faction, led by figures such as Stephen Gardiner and Thomas Wriothesley, viewed Catherine's Protestant leanings with suspicion. They watched her closely, waiting for an opportunity to undermine her. At the same time, the reformist faction, associated with figures like Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, saw Catherine as a crucial ally and worked quietly to protect her. Henry's own moods were a constant threat. His health was worsening, and with it came bouts of deep paranoia and cruelty. Catherine had to exercise extraordinary tact to maintain his favor. She engaged him in theological discussions, flattering his intellect while carefully deferring to his ultimate authority. She soothed his tempers with patience and tended to his many physical ailments with a combination of deference and firmness. Catherine became not just a wife but a nurse, companion, and in many ways, a caretaker of the king's declining body and spirit. The marriage between Henry and Catherine, though lacking in passion, was marked by a surprising degree of mutual respect. Henry appreciated Catherine's loyalty and her ability to manage the court's domestic affairs. He trusted her enough to leave her as regent when he embarked on a military campaign in France in 1544, a significant sign of confidence in her capabilities. During his absence, Catherine governed England with prudence, maintaining stability and ensuring the continuation of royal authority. Her regency was a success, further solidifying her reputation as a capable and intelligent queen. Nevertheless, dangers remained ever present. In 1546, the conservative faction sought to bring down Catherine by exploiting her interest in religious reform. They accused her of heresy, a charge that carried the death penalty. Catherine, learning of the plot, responded with remarkable shrewdness. She approached the king and portrayed her religious discussions as mere attempts to distract and comfort him, acknowledging his supreme wisdom and claiming no intention to challenge his views. Henry, mollified and perhaps amused by her cleverness, forgave her and turned against those who had sought to destroy her. Catherine's survival was a testament not only to her quick thinking, but also to her profound understanding of the king's psychology. Throughout her marriage to Henry, Catherine continued to support education and the arts. She fostered an environment in which learning was valued, encouraging her stepchildren to study languages, history, and theology. Elizabeth, in particular, benefited from Catherine's example and influence, developing the intellectual rigor that would later characterize her own reign. Catherine's emphasis on education for women was revolutionary for the time and would have a lasting impact far beyond the court. Privately, Catherine maintained her faith in reformist ideals, corresponding with scholars and theologians who shared her vision for a more spiritually accessible church. She read extensively, wrote prayers and meditations, and prepared herself spiritually for the uncertainties of life in a court where favor could be lost in an instant. Her writings reveal a woman of deep introspection, compassion, and resilience, a queen who understood both the burdens of power and the fleeting nature of earthly authority. As Henry's health deteriorated further, the court became a place of quiet waiting, filled with anxiety about what the future might hold. Factions positioned themselves for the inevitable succession struggle, and Catherine, though still queen, had to tread carefully to ensure her safety once Henry was gone. She remained a model of patience and devotion to the very end, tending to the increasingly irascible king as his strength faded. When Henry VIII died in January 1547, Catherine was widowed for the third time. Her role as queen ended, but her influence remained. She had survived one of the most dangerous marriages in English history, not through beauty or blind obedience, but through intelligence, adaptability, and profound emotional strength. Catherine Parr's marriage to Henry VIII was not a love story in the traditional sense. It was a testament to duty, endurance, and the complex art of survival in a world where the personal was always political and the stakes were often a matter of life and death. When Catherine Parr married Henry VIII, she stepped into a role that extended far beyond that of queen consort. She became a stepmother to 3 royal children, each bearing the marks of a tumultuous upbringing shaped by their father's many marriages and the religious upheavals of his reign. These were not ordinary children, but heirs and symbols of England's future, each carrying the weight of a complicated legacy. Catherine's relationship with Mary, Elizabeth, and Edward would become one of the most defining aspects of her life, transforming her not merely into Henry's wife, but into a maternal figure of intellect, patience, and remarkable foresight. Catherine's first challenge was the delicate navigation of Henry's strained relationships with his 2 daughters. Mary, the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, had endured the heartbreak of watching her mother discarded, her own title stripped, and her legitimacy openly questioned. Elizabeth, the daughter of Anne Boleyn, suffered a similar fate after her mother's execution. She too was declared illegitimate and pushed to the margins of court. Though Henry occasionally showed paternal affection, he remained suspicious of both daughters. Only Edward, the son of Jane Seymour, enjoyed his father's unreserved approval as the long-awaited male heir. Catherine Parr approached this fragile web of royal emotions with extraordinary care. She treated Mary and Elizabeth with the dignity due to their royal birth, regardless of their precarious legal standing. She understood that genuine affection and the appearance of inclusion both held powerful sway. She made sure the princesses were visible in court life, welcomed them into her household, and offered them the sense of belonging they had long been denied. Her attention also extended to Edward, recognizing his youth and vulnerability amidst a court teeming with men eager to influence the next king. Education was among Catherine's deepest passions. A learned woman herself, fluent in multiple languages and well-versed in theology, she held a firm belief that knowledge had the power to uplift and transform. She applied this philosophy to all 3 of her stepchildren, advocating for a humanist education that emphasized reason, virtue, and classical learning. Her influence was especially transformative for Elizabeth. Recognizing the girl's remarkable intellect, Catherine ensured she had access to the most advanced education available. Elizabeth's curriculum included Latin, Greek, history, rhetoric, and philosophy, laying the foundation for what would become one of the greatest intellects to ever sit on the English throne. Mary, though older and less aligned with the reformist leanings that Catherine favored, also benefited from the Queen's sense of duty and respect for education. Catherine ensured Mary was treated with honor and offered the space to maintain her Catholic faith without immediate conflict. Edward, the young prince, was encouraged to pursue his studies rigorously, and under Catherine's influence, he developed the scholarly discipline that would mark his short but earnest reign. Catherine's efforts were not confined to the realm of education. She became a powerful agent for reconciliation between Henry and his daughters. At a time when women were expected to play ornamental roles, Catherine used her position to subtly and effectively advocate for family unity. Through gentle persuasion and private conversations, she encouraged Henry to soften his views on Mary and Elizabeth, framing the importance of dynastic strength in terms even the aging monarch could appreciate. Her diplomacy bore fruit. In the year 1544, the Parliament passed the Third Succession Act, restoring Mary and Elizabeth to the line of succession behind Edward. While their legitimacy was not formally reinstated, their political status as heirs was legally recognized. An extraordinary achievement, and one in which Catherine's quiet yet consistent efforts played a crucial role. She understood the nuances of power in a patriarchal court and managed to work within them to bring about real change, not for herself, but for the children of England's future. Catherine's influence on Elizabeth in particular cannot be overstated. Beyond fostering her education and helping restore her political prospects, Catherine gave Elizabeth a living example of how a woman might hold authority with intelligence and poise. In Catherine, Elizabeth saw a model of female strength, dignity, and moral integrity. She watched her stepmother navigate religious conflict, court politics, and marital expectations with remarkable grace. These lessons would echo throughout Elizabeth's reign, from her cautious approach to religious division to her strategic use of personal symbolism and her deep respect for intellectualism. Following Henry's death in January 1547, Catherine did not relinquish her maternal role. She assumed guardianship of Elizabeth and welcomed her into the household she shared with her new husband, Thomas Seymour. After years of delayed affection, Catherine had finally married the man she loved. Her home became a beacon of intellectual life, filled with reformers, scholars, and cultural figures. Elizabeth continued her studies there, further developing the mind that would one day govern an empire. Yet Catherine's later years were shadowed by personal pain. Her marriage to Seymour, while rooted in affection, proved difficult. Seymour's political ambitions and troubling behavior, particularly his inappropriate conduct toward the adolescent Elizabeth, created a crisis that tested Catherine's strength. She worked to protect Elizabeth's safety and reputation, even as her heart broke over her husband's betrayal. Once again, she put her stepdaughter's welfare before her own. Catherine Parr died in September 1548, shortly after giving birth to her only child. Her death left a profound emptiness in the lives of the royal children she had nurtured so lovingly. Yet her legacy endured in each of them. Edward, despite his youth, approached his kingship with a scholar's seriousness, reflecting the intellectual rigor Catherine had encouraged. Mary, though eventually opposed to Elizabeth's religious path, carried forward Catherine's emphasis on royal dignity and duty. Most significantly, Elizabeth inherited Catherine's vision of what a female ruler could be: wise, controlled, and masterfully influential. Catherine Parr's role as stepmother was extraordinary in its depth and impact. She brought not only affection to the role, but political insight and moral courage. At a time when queens were often expected to remain silent or submissive, she carved out a role of active leadership and healing. She restored relationships, elevated education, and helped stabilize a fractured family at the heart of the Tudor court. Through her steadfast patience, intelligence, and genuine care, Catherine Parr helped mend old wounds and prepare her stepchildren for the challenges that lay ahead. She was more than a queen consort. She was a mother in spirit, a political strategist in practice, and a quiet architect of England's future. Her influence lived on in Elizabeth I, whose long and glorious reign became the embodiment of the values Catherine had cherished: wisdom, unity, and the transformative power of education. Behind the glory of the Virgin Queen stood the legacy of a woman who had once ruled with humility, strength, and vision, a stepmother who had truly become a mother to the nation's future. In the summer of 1544, as King Henry VIII set out on his military campaign in France, the burden of ruling England in his absence fell to his sixth wife, Catherine Parr. This decision was extraordinary, not only because of the deeply entrenched patriarchy of the time, but also because of the political gravity of the moment. By placing Catherine in such a powerful position, Henry signaled an exceptional level of trust in her intelligence, composure, and administrative skill. While there had been queens who acted as regents in earlier centuries, it was still highly unusual in Tudor England for a woman to be given formal political authority, especially during wartime. As regent, Catherine Parr was granted sweeping powers, though many popular accounts of her life either gloss over or entirely ignore this aspect of her role. Henry's campaign aimed to capture the French stronghold of Boulogne and assert English claims on French territory, leaving England exposed to threats from both within and beyond its borders. Scotland posed a significant danger, and Catholic powers on the continent still viewed Henry's break with Rome as heresy. In this tense political climate, Catherine was responsible not only for maintaining the routine functions of government, but also for overseeing national defense and political stability. One of Catherine's most remarkable achievements was her deft management of domestic politics. The Tudor court was a minefield of ambition, rivalry, and scheming, nobles and courtiers eager to fill the vacuum of power left by Henry's departure. Catherine proved remarkably capable of balancing the competing factions, leaning on a circle of trusted advisors while never becoming their puppet. She was no figurehead. The fact that no major factional crisis erupted during her regency is a testament to her quiet but effective political management. Externally, England faced multiple threats, most notably from the north. The war with Scotland had escalated after the death of King James V and the succession of his infant daughter, Mary, Queen of Scots. England's response, a brutal campaign known as the Rough Wooing, sought to secure a marriage alliance between young Mary and Prince Edward. Catherine, through her Regency Council, made sure these military actions remained well-supported and strategically sound. She understood the importance of logistics and careful planning, avoiding the overreach that could have plunged England into deeper instability. Meanwhile, with much of the English military focused on France, there was growing anxiety about potential invasions along the coasts. Catherine tackled this threat with calm precision. She fortified coastal defenses, ensured that local militias were prepared, and directed the allocation of essential resources. Though she may not have worn armor or led troops, her administrative control over England's military readiness was clear and effective. The fact that no major invasion occurred during this period speaks volumes about her competence. Catherine's sense of political authority extended beyond mere administration. She understood that symbolism and presentation were crucial to securing legitimacy. In Henry's absence, she presided over court ceremonies, issued royal proclamations, and engaged in diplomatic correspondence. She always presented herself as acting on the king's behalf, careful never to overstep or suggest independent rule. This delicate balance between authority and deference was a masterclass in Tudor political strategy. However, Catherine's regency was not simply an act of loyalty to her husband. She used her position to promote causes close to her heart, particularly religious reform. A committed Protestant sympathizer, she surrounded herself with like-minded thinkers, quietly encouraging the spread of reformist ideas. While she was careful not to provoke conservative backlash, her influence subtly moved the Church of England closer to Protestant doctrine. These seeds of reform would flourish more openly under Edward VI and later, Elizabeth I. Despite the male-dominated nature of 16th-century politics, Catherine Parr proved that a woman could wield power with wisdom, restraint, and effectiveness. Her regency during Henry's absence marked a turning point in perceptions of female capability. Those who watched her govern saw firsthand that political stability, military management, and policy execution were not beyond a woman's reach. While this realization may not have immediately transformed Tudor gender norms, it planted ideas that would become increasingly significant during the reigns of England's future queens. Furthermore, Catherine's regency helped to strengthen key institutions within English government. She worked closely with the Privy Council, reinforcing its role as a central administrative body that could operate effectively even without the king's direct oversight. This model of governance, ruled by council rather than an all-powerful favorite, would become a defining feature of Elizabeth I's political strategy. The young Elizabeth, living at court during Catherine's regency, surely took note of the Queen's leadership style and the balance she maintained between power and prudence. Catherine's time as regent also reinforced the importance of continuity in royal governance. By upholding Henry's policies and maintaining the illusion of his constant presence, She reassured both domestic and foreign audiences that England remained stable and strong. In an age when dynastic instability could lead to rebellion or foreign invasion, this was no small achievement. Her stewardship kept England united and prepared for the king's return. Her regency was not without peril. Rumors swirled, and ambitious courtiers watched her every move for signs of overreach or vulnerability. One misstep could have invited scandal or even charges of treason. But Catherine, seasoned by previous marriages and life at court, knew how to protect herself. She was diplomatic, careful, and always aware of her surroundings. Her discretion and tact kept her above the fray and allowed her to lead without becoming a target. When Henry returned from France, his health visibly deteriorating, he found a country that had remained orderly and secure. He did not lavish praise on Catherine publicly. That was never Henry's style. But the continued influence she wielded in his final years suggests that he recognized and valued her contributions. Her regency was a quiet triumph, proof of her political skill and personal discipline. In hindsight, Catherine Parr's regency during the summer of 1544 was one of the most significant yet understated chapters of Tudor governance. She demonstrated that female leadership was not merely a contingency plan, but a viable path to effective rule. Her calm, capable stewardship helped guide England through a potentially chaotic period and offered a vision of governance rooted in prudence, balance, and reformist ideals. Catherine's legacy, forged not just as a consort, but as a ruler, had lasting impact. She modeled a style of queenship that went beyond courtly grace and maternal duty. She governed. She led. She shaped the future. And in doing so, she left behind a legacy of political wisdom that would resonate in the reigns of Mary I and Elizabeth I. Her regency, quiet, composed, and visionary, remains one of the finest examples of female leadership in English royal history. Catherine Parr's religious beliefs were a complex and evolving aspect of her life, shaped by both her personal convictions and the tumultuous religious environment of 16th-century England. As the wife of Henry VIII, she found herself at the center of one of the most significant periods in English religious history, the English Reformation. Catherine's journey from a Catholic upbringing to later Protestant sympathies was not just a private transformation, but also a reflection of the sweeping religious shifts at the royal court and across the kingdom. Throughout her life, she remained a strong advocate for reform, though her beliefs were often tempered by pragmatism, especially in an era when a person's faith could mean the difference between favor and disgrace, or even life and death. Born in the year 1512, Catherine Parr was raised in a devout Catholic family, consistent with the prevailing faith of England at the time. Her family, part of the landed nobility, was deeply rooted in the Catholic traditions that had defined English religious life for centuries. Her early education was shaped by the doctrines of the Catholic Church, including a strong emphasis on the authority of the clergy, the sanctity of the sacraments, and the reverence for ecclesiastical tradition. Yet, as Catherine grew older, the religious landscape of England was undergoing profound changes. The break with Rome, initiated by Henry VIII's desire to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon and wed in Boulogne, signaled the beginning of the English Reformation, a seismic shift that would redefine English faith and politics. Catherine's own religious views began to change as these reforms took hold. Though she was certainly influenced by the religious policy of the court, her personal leanings increasingly aligned with the reformist ideas taking root in Protestant Europe. Henry's establishment of the Church of England, severing ties with papal authority, laid the foundation for reform, even if he personally remained theologically conservative. Catherine, however, was drawn to a faith that emphasized personal engagement with Scripture and a diminished role for the traditional clergy. By the time she became queen in 1543, her private convictions had already been shaped by Protestant ideals, particularly those that prioritized the authority of the Bible over church tradition. One of her most enduring contributions to religious reform came through her active patronage of Protestant thinkers and theologians. Catherine fostered a court culture that welcomed debate and scholarship, gathering around her a circle of religious reformers who were advancing the Protestant cause. Among these were Hugh Latimer and Thomas Cranmer, two of the most significant religious figures of the English Reformation. By surrounding herself with such individuals, Catherine was not merely engaging in theological dialogue. She was taking a political stance. Her patronage lent credibility and support to the reform movement at a time when such backing from the Queen could shift the balance of power in courtly and ecclesiastical circles. Catherine's advocacy extended beyond ceremonial support. Her court became a hub of theological conversation and learning, where scholars debated scripture and explored the doctrines of the Reformation. These gatherings, held within the relatively safe confines of her household, were more than intellectual salons. They were spaces where the future of English religion was being shaped. Catherine's influence in these discussions was profound, both because of her position and her intellectual engagement. Her endorsement of religious texts and theologians helped promote a vision of Christianity that emphasized personal piety and scriptural authority. Central to Catherine's religious transformation was her own study of the Bible. A gifted and diligent reader, she delved deeply into theological works and scripture, finding in them both spiritual solace and intellectual inspiration. She was especially influenced by the writings of Martin Luther and William Tyndale, reformers who championed access to the Bible in the English language and rejected the central authority of the Catholic Church. Her engagement with these texts reflected not only her commitment to faith, but also her belief in the spiritual empowerment of individuals. Catherine's private devotion was rooted in the idea that faith must be a personal relationship with God, unmediated by institutional clergy or complex rituals. This personal, inward faith shaped her religious practices. While she continued to observe some Catholic traditions, such as attending Mass and performing acts of charity, she increasingly adopted Protestant forms of devotion. She prayed privately, studied scripture independently, and embraced the Protestant emphasis on personal interpretation of the Bible. She also championed private prayer, a marked contrast to Catholicism's highly structured and clericalized model of worship. In this, she not only practiced Protestant faith but modeled it for others, showing how devotion could flourish outside the confines of the traditional church. Nonetheless, Catherine's religious journey was not without peril. The reign of Henry VIII was marked by religious uncertainty and repression. Although the king had declared himself the head of the Church of England, he retained many Catholic doctrines and punished those who diverged too far in either direction. This created a treacherous political and spiritual landscape for reform-minded individuals. Catherine, like others before her, had to tread carefully. The examples of Anne Boleyn and Catherine of Aragon, both of whom suffered due to their religious or political associations, were stark reminders of how dangerous it could be to challenge the prevailing orthodoxy. Catherine's position as queen consort demanded discretion and diplomacy. She had to express her beliefs without threatening the fragile religious order or provoking the king's ire. Henry's religious stance was notoriously inconsistent. While he rejected papal authority, he upheld the importance of traditional sacraments and suppressed radical reformers. Catherine had to align herself outwardly with his official policies, even when her private faith diverged. She could support reformers in her household and commission devotional literature, but she could not be seen as undermining the king's theological authority. Her relationship with Henry VIII added to the complexity of her situation. As the king's health declined in the final years of his reign, he became increasingly suspicious and authoritarian. His paranoia extended to religious matters, and reformers at court often found themselves under threat. During this period, Catherine's position became increasingly precarious. She continued to support reformers quietly, but she avoided direct challenges to the religious establishment. A particularly tense episode occurred when some members of the conservative faction at court sought to turn Henry against her, accusing her of heresy. Catherine's quick thinking and humility saved her. She assured the king that her religious discussions were merely efforts to distract him from his ailments and not challenges to his authority. Despite these difficulties, Catherine's religious legacy endured. After Henry's death in 1547, her reformist ideas gained new ground. She married the Protestant nobleman Thomas Seymour and remained active in religious circles. More importantly, her influence continued through the reign of her stepson, Edward VI. The young king, under the guidance of Protestant advisors, established Protestantism as the state religion of England. Catherine's intellectual and spiritual guidance had played a part in shaping Edward's early views, and her patronage of Protestant scholars helped lay the groundwork for the deeper reforms of his reign. Catherine Parr's life reveals a woman of remarkable intellect, faith, and courage. Her journey from Catholicism to Protestantism mirrored the broader transformation of English society, but it was also deeply personal. She studied, questioned, prayed, and engaged, often in silence and secrecy, but always with conviction. She advanced the cause of reform not through confrontation, but through education, patronage, and quiet resilience. Her legacy is that of a queen who embraced reform not as a political necessity, but as a spiritual calling. In doing so, she helped shape the religious identity of England and earned her place as one of the pivotal figures in the history of the English Reformation. Catherine Parr's journey as queen consort of Henry VIII was marked not only by her political intelligence, but also by her deep religious convictions, which brought her into direct conflict with the king's conservative Catholic views and the deeply entrenched power structures at court. As Henry's sixth and final wife, Catherine was a reform-minded queen, walking a precarious line between the rising tide of Protestant reform and the older Catholic doctrines that still held sway with many powerful figures in the realm. This friction between faith and political survival led Catherine into dangerous theological disputes, confrontations with influential enemies, and a narrowly averted execution. It was a perilous chapter in Tudor history, one that could easily have ended in tragedy, but Catherine's survival proved the strength of her intellect, her tactical thinking, and her ability to bend when necessary to save her life. The most serious threat Catherine faced stemmed from her religious disagreements with Henry, particularly as his health declined and his rule grew more tyrannical. Despite his break with Rome and the founding of the Church of England, Henry remained essentially conservative in matters of faith. He preserved many Catholic traditions, including belief in the sacraments and the authority of the clergy, even though he had rejected the Pope's supremacy. Henry never fully accepted Protestant reforms, and as time passed, he became increasingly suspicious and hostile toward what he considered radical religious ideas. Catherine, however, had come to embrace the Protestant cause. Influenced by her friendships with leading reformers and her own study of Scripture, she developed strong beliefs aligned with the new religious movement. By the time she became queen, Catherine was seen as a central figure in the reformist circle at court. But her religious discussions with Henry were not private musings. They were, in effect, political statements. In the Tudor court, where faith and power were deeply intertwined, Catherine's advocacy of reform put her in a position of serious risk. The queen consort debating religion with the king could easily be perceived as challenging his authority, a dangerous prospect in a realm where two of his previous wives had already met violent ends. The risks were compounded by the enemies Catherine made at court. Chief among them was Bishop Stephen Gardiner, a staunch Catholic and an ardent enemy of the Protestant cause. Gardiner had long opposed religious reform and had a history of helping bring down those who supported it, including Anne Boleyn. With his deep influence as Bishop of Winchester and his close ties to the old religious establishment, Gardiner viewed Catherine as a genuine threat. Her support of Protestant scholars, her patronage of religious reformers, and her proximity to the king made her a high-value target for Gardiner and his allies, who believed that rooting out heresy was vital to the preservation of both church and crown. In the year 1546, the political and religious climate at court grew increasingly hostile. Gardiner, always calculating and opportunistic, saw an opening to strike. He began building a case against Catherine, accusing her of heresy, a capital crime. The accusations focused on her private discussions with reformist thinkers and her supposed intention to sway Henry toward full Protestantism. These charges, in the eyes of her enemies, painted Catherine not only as a spiritual deviant, but as a political insurgent who threatened the king's control. An arrest warrant was drawn up. It was a moment of immense danger for Catherine. Though she had enjoyed a close relationship with the king, she knew better than most how quickly Henry's favor could turn to fury. Catherine understood that even a queen was not beyond the reach of the axe. The charges of heresy, if carried through, would have meant a death sentence. In the shadows of court intrigue, with powerful figures like Gardiner moving against her, Catherine was forced to confront the very real possibility that she might follow in the footsteps of Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, queens who had once held the king's affection but had ended their lives on the scaffold. Faced with this grim reality, Catherine made a bold and intelligent decision. She did not try to out-argue her accusers or stubbornly defend her theological beliefs. Instead, she turned to political strategy and emotional tact. She approached Henry with humility, portraying her earlier religious debates not as challenges to his wisdom, but as attempts to learn from his superior knowledge. She emphasized her devotion to him and to the Church of England as he defined it. Catherine framed herself not as a rebellious reformer, but as a loyal wife who had simply engaged in conversation out of a desire to understand better the teachings her husband held dear. This act of submission was more than a theatrical performance. It was a brilliant piece of political maneuvering. Catherine defused the situation not by abandoning her beliefs, but by choosing not to fight openly. She used her words and demeanor to soothe the king's suspicions, reminding him of her loyalty and care during his illness and portraying herself as a woman too devoted to threaten his authority. Her calculated humility disarmed her enemies and reminded Henry of the affection he still held for her. The success of this strategy became clear when, shortly after her conciliatory approach, the arrest warrant was mysteriously withdrawn. According to court gossip, when officers arrived to arrest the Queen, Henry furiously dismissed them, rebuking those who had tried to turn him against his wife. Catherine had not only saved her own life, she had outmaneuvered her enemies in a dangerous and unpredictable environment. Her survival was no accident. It was the result of shrewd thinking, emotional intelligence, and a deep understanding of court politics. After the arrest warrant episode, Catherine remained cautious. She toned down her public support for Protestant ideas and avoided overt religious debate with the king. Nevertheless, she quietly continued to support reformist causes, using her position to protect and patronize scholars, publish devotional writings, and encourage female education. She never fully renounced her beliefs, but she wisely chose to promote them in ways that would not draw dangerous scrutiny. Catherine's ability to survive, where other queens had failed, rested on her adaptability. She understood that the court was a place where ideals could be dangerous, and that survival often demanded careful compromise. Her intelligence, humility, and tactical retreat allowed her to continue her work and preserve her life in the face of mortal danger. The episode with the arrest warrant became one of the defining moments of her queenship, a test of character and political skill that she passed with remarkable grace and composure. In the final analysis, Catherine Parr's survival during this crisis was not due to luck, but to her own insight and courage. She was a queen who knew how to read the king, how to gauge the political temperature, and how to act swiftly when her life was at stake. She was not a martyr for her faith, but neither was she a coward. She walked the razor-thin line between belief and obedience with rare finesse, preserving her life and continuing to influence the religious course of England long after the danger had passed. Catherine's story is a reminder of the complex roles women played in Tudor politics. Her narrow escape from execution shows the power of intellect and strategy in a world dominated by violence, ideology, and fear. Her decision to submit was not weakness. It was a survival tactic grounded in wisdom. And in the end, her survival enabled her to leave a legacy that went far beyond the shadow of that arrest warrant. After the death of King Henry VIII in the year 1547, Catherine Parr entered a new chapter of her life. As a widow, she was no longer the queen consort of England, but she still held a prominent place in the Tudor court as the Dowager Queen. Her position was a complicated one, both a widow and a powerful woman in a volatile political landscape. Catherine's transition from the regal position of queen to the status of widow presented challenges and opportunities alike, as she navigated questions of financial security, shifts within her household, and deeply personal decisions. Yet her period of widowhood was not to last long, for Catherine soon remarried, a decision that would have lasting consequences and spark political unrest. Upon Henry's death, Catherine found herself in a relatively secure position financially. As a royal widow, she retained several lands and estates that had been granted to her during her marriage. This wealth provided her with independence and a rare kind of stability in an age when most women, even noble ones, were dependent on male guardians. As Dowager Queen, Catherine maintained elevated status at court, even though she no longer wore a crown. Her identity as the widow of Henry VIII allowed her continued access to the royal family and influential figures. But her life was soon to take a dramatic turn because of her next marriage. Catherine's financial situation was more favorable than that of many other widows. She had the legal right to control her property, including the various estates that were part of her dowry or had been awarded to her by the late king. This financial foundation gave her a sense of autonomy that few women in Tudor England possessed. Many noble widows were at the mercy of their sons, in-laws, or the crown, but Catherine's position as a former queen allowed her greater freedom. Her wealth, combined with her title as Dowager Queen, granted her an ongoing presence in court life and social affairs, even though the king was gone. However, her life as a widow was not without its difficulties. Catherine had to maneuver within the strict societal expectations placed upon widows, especially those with royal associations. In early Tudor society, widows were expected to embody decorum, modesty, and dignified conduct. Catherine, despite her education and intellect, had to remain within these constraints to avoid public or political backlash. Her position was powerful, but it was also precarious. Catherine's personal world had changed profoundly after Henry's death. The court, once revolving around the king, had now shifted its focus to the young boy king, Edward VI, Henry's only legitimate son. Power now resided in the hands of the Regency Council, appointed to govern on Edward's behalf. Although Catherine still held the title of Dowager Queen, she was no longer at the center of national power. Her status in the royal household had diminished, and with it, her direct influence on affairs of state. During this time, Catherine devoted herself to more private pursuits. Notably, she took a keen interest in the education of her stepchildren, especially Princess Elizabeth. Elizabeth had once been removed from court during Catherine's marriage to Henry, but now Catherine sought to reunite with and mentor the young girl, who was second in line to the throne. As an accomplished scholar and devout reformer, Catherine provided Elizabeth with a rigorous education in religion, languages, and literature, laying the intellectual foundation that would later define Elizabeth's reign. Yet Catherine's widowhood was not to remain tranquil. Intelligent, ambitious, and still relatively young, she was not content to live out her days in quiet seclusion. After only a few months, she entered into a new romantic relationship, one that would soon blossom into marriage, though not without controversy. Her new husband was Thomas Seymour, the brother of Jane Seymour, Henry VIII's third wife and the mother of Edward VI. Catherine's relationship with Thomas was initially conducted in secrecy, and their marriage in the year 1547 was a cause of court gossip and scandal once it became public. Thomas Seymour was not only Catherine's suitor. He was a man with immense political ambitions and a thirst for power. His courtship of Catherine was likely driven as much by personal desire as by strategic motives, for marrying the widow of the former king gave him a new level of influence. At the time, Thomas Seymour held the title of Baron Seymour of Sudeley. He had long harbored ambitions of climbing the political ladder and securing his own place of power in the new regime. But his personality was volatile. He was known for his charm, his recklessness, and his lack of political caution. Catherine, despite her wisdom, was drawn to him. Perhaps it was love, or perhaps it was a desire for companionship after years of careful, often lonely queenship. Whatever the reason, she entered into the marriage with optimism, unaware of the storm it would bring. At first, their marriage seemed affectionate and perhaps even happy. But Thomas's ambitions soon clashed with the realities of court life and royal responsibility. His flirtations with Princess Elizabeth, who was living under their roof, became a source of scandal and deeply strained Catherine's relationship with her stepdaughter. Elizabeth, still a teenager and future queen, was vulnerable to the attention of a man like Thomas. What began as teasing and flirtation soon appeared inappropriate and threatening. Catherine, caught between her loyalty to her husband and her duty to Elizabeth, found herself in an impossible situation. Ultimately, Elizabeth was sent away for her own protection, but the damage to their relationship had already been done. Trust had been eroded, and the warmth that once existed between Catherine and her beloved stepdaughter never fully recovered. Politically, the marriage to Thomas Seymour was disastrous. While Catherine had hoped for companionship, Thomas saw opportunity. He believed that by marrying the king's widow, he could assert a stronger claim to power under Edward's rule. His actions grew increasingly reckless, and his political scheming alarmed members of the Regency Council, especially his own brother, Edward Seymour, who held the position of Lord Protector. Thomas's thirst for power led him to meddle in the politics of the realm, attempting to manipulate his way into greater influence. At one point, he was even accused of attempting to kidnap the young king, Edward, in a brazen and foolish plot. His ambitions were too dangerous to ignore. In the end, Thomas was arrested, charged with treason, and executed in the Tower of London in early 1549. Catherine Parr was left a widow once more. This time, the end came not from the death of a beloved monarch, but from the betrayal and political collapse of a reckless man. The consequences of her second marriage were profound. Her once strong relationship with Elizabeth had been deeply wounded. Her reputation, while not destroyed, had been tested by association with Thomas's disgrace. And once again, she found herself alone, mourning not just a husband, but the hope of a peaceful and respected life in her final years. Despite all of this, Catherine Parr remained a remarkable figure. Her resilience, her intellect, and her devotion to reformist ideas left a lasting mark on the Tudor court. She had survived one of the most dangerous positions in England, Queen to Henry VIII. She had navigated widowhood with grace and independence, mentored one of England's greatest monarchs, and endured the collapse of a disastrous second marriage. Catherine's story was not simply one of scandal, it was one of strength. Catherine died in childbirth in late 1548, not long after Thomas Seymour's arrest. Her final months were spent away from court, in relative quiet, at Sudeley Castle. She left behind a legacy of religious reform, intellectual growth, and quiet courage. In a world where women were so often silenced or used as pawns in political games, Catherine Parr stood out, a queen who dared to think, write, love, and lead on her own terms. In the final months of Catherine Parr's life, she experienced both joy and tragedy. Despite the trials she had endured throughout her life, from multiple marriages to political intrigue, Catherine's later years seemed to promise the happiness she had long sought. At nearly 35 years old, Catherine became pregnant once more, a remarkable event given the advanced age for a woman to carry a child in the 16th century. Her marriage to Thomas Seymour, her second husband after the death of Henry VIII, seemed to offer a new chapter, and the possibility of motherhood was one she embraced eagerly. Catherine's pregnancy, however, would ultimately lead to her untimely death. She gave birth to a daughter, Mary Seymour, in August of the year 1548. The birth was difficult, and the complications that followed were significant. Catherine, in the aftermath of childbirth, contracted puerperal fever, a deadly infection that was common during that time for women after giving birth. It was a tragic fate, and Catherine, despite her intelligence, resilience, and years of survival through tumultuous marriages and political upheaval, could not survive the ravages of this common yet often fatal illness. The death of Catherine Parr on the 5th of September, 1548, was deeply felt by those closest to her. She had lived through much in her 36 years, surviving the complexities of Henry VIII's court, navigating the treacherous waters of religion and politics, and becoming the first English queen to publish under her own name. Her death marked the end of an era. For Thomas Seymour, her passing was a blow, leaving him with his infant daughter, Mary Seymour, who would eventually be lost to history in a largely forgotten life. Elizabeth I, who had been both influenced and shaped by Catherine, also felt the loss of her stepmother, who had helped to guide her during her formative years. For Elizabeth, Catherine's death was a turning point. Despite the tensions that had existed between the two women, particularly due to the behavior of Thomas Seymour, Elizabeth's loss of Catherine was significant. Catherine had been a mother figure to Elizabeth during her early years in the court of Henry VIII. The education and religious outlook that Catherine imparted had a lasting impact on Elizabeth's reign and views on queenship. Elizabeth would later reflect on Catherine's role in shaping her ideas about ruling, women's education, and the religious reforms that had characterized her stepmother's life. Catherine's death left a gap not just in her immediate family, but also in the political and religious landscape of England. While she may have lived a life that seemed to be one of survival, her death highlighted the frailty of life in Tudor England, especially for women. It was a reminder of the challenges women faced during the period, where childbirth was both a blessing and a potential death sentence. The death of Catherine Parr, so soon after the birth of her daughter, was a stark reminder of the vulnerability of even the most resilient of women. The political fallout from her death was also notable. Thomas Seymour's life continued to unravel after her death. His own ambitions, now unrestrained by Catherine's presence, led to his involvement in dangerous plots, which eventually resulted in his arrest and execution. The political turbulence surrounding Seymour's downfall underscored the precarious nature of power in Tudor England. After Catherine's death, the focus returned to the young Edward VI, and the turmoil of the Seymour family served as a reminder of the dangers of unchecked ambition. Despite the tragedy of her death, Catherine Parr's legacy lived on. She had shaped not only the future of her family, but also the broader course of English history, particularly through her contributions to religious reform, her role as an early female author, and her influence on Elizabeth I's reign. Catherine Parr was not merely a wife or a queen. She was a woman who actively contributed to the political, religious, and cultural landscape of her time. One of Catherine Parr's most significant contributions to England was her role in religious reform. As a queen consort, she aligned herself with the Protestant faction of the English court, advocating for reform and supporting the spread of Protestant ideas. While she did not have the same political power as Henry VIII or Edward VI, her position as queen consort allowed her to promote religious ideas and reforms in a way that few women could. Her influence on the religious direction of England was subtle but significant. She helped to steer England further away from Catholicism, providing support for the reformers and working to maintain Protestant ideologies within the royal court. Her role in religious reform extended beyond her political influence. Catherine Parr was also an intellectual force in her own right. She was a learned woman who engaged in theological debates and wrote extensively on religious matters. Her works, including Prayers or Meditations and The Lamentation of a Sinner, became important texts in the development of Protestant thought in England. These writings, published in the years following her death, had a lasting impact on the religious landscape of the country, providing a voice for women in theological debates. She was the first English queen to publish under her own name, a notable achievement that helped to pave the way for other women to contribute to the intellectual and literary life of the nation. Her literary contributions also extended to her personal prayers and meditations, which reflect her deep spirituality and commitment to the reformist ideals of the time. These works helped to shape the way that women in the Tudor period were able to engage with religious and philosophical thought. They provided an example of how women could contribute to the intellectual and spiritual life of their society, despite the limitations placed on them by the patriarchal structure of the time. Catherine Parr's writings continue to be studied and appreciated for their theological depth and their pioneering role in women's intellectual history. Catherine Parr's influence on the reign of Elizabeth I cannot be understated. While Elizabeth and Catherine may have had their differences, particularly due to the strained relationship caused by Thomas Seymour's actions, Catherine's influence on Elizabeth as a ruler was profound. As a stepmother, Catherine provided Elizabeth with a model of strong, independent queenship. Her commitment to education, her engagement with theological debates, and her ability to navigate the complex politics of the Tudor court were qualities that Elizabeth later embraced. Catherine's example showed Elizabeth that women could rule effectively, even in a world dominated by men. She had a quiet yet substantial influence on Elizabeth's understanding of power, governance, and religion. In addition to her direct influence on Elizabeth, Catherine Parr's legacy has been reassessed in modern times. Historians have come to recognize Catherine not just as a survivor of Henry VIII's tumultuous reign, but as a woman who shaped the course of history. Her role in religious reform, her contributions to intellectual and literary life, and her influence on the future Queen of England have made her a key figure in the Tudor period. Today, she is recognized not just as a queen consort, but as a powerful and influential woman in her own right. Catherine Parr's life was one of resilience, intellect, and quiet revolution. Though often remembered merely as the sixth and final wife of Henry VIII, a woman who survived where others had perished, this limited view does little justice to the breadth of her influence or the depth of her contributions. Her legacy is one of subtle yet enduring power, and her story challenges the notion that agency in the Tudor world belonged solely to kings and their male advisors. Born into a noble but politically unremarkable family, Catherine defied expectations from the beginning. Through 4 marriages, each shaped by the turbulent times in which she lived, Catherine did not merely adapt, she grew in stature, insight, and courage. Her final years were marked by a tragic end, dying shortly after childbirth in her mid-30s. But those final chapters also reveal a woman who had at last embraced personal happiness, maternal hope, and political independence. She had earned the affection of a nation, the respect of scholars, and the admiration of a future queen. Throughout her life, Catherine was shaped by the currents of religious reform that swept across Europe in the 16th century. But unlike many of her contemporaries, she did not merely follow religious movements, she helped lead them. Her open embrace of Protestantism and her protection of reformers placed her in real danger at a court where religious loyalties could shift overnight. She was, at one point, nearly arrested for her beliefs, and only her intelligence and tact saved her from the same fate that had befallen many others. Yet Catherine's belief in reform was not shallow political posturing. It was deeply held and profoundly expressed in her published writings. Her books, Prayers or Meditations, and The Lamentation of a Sinner, offered spiritual guidance and theological insight, providing a powerful female voice in a domain long dominated by men. This literary contribution alone would have set her apart in Tudor England. Catherine Parr became the first queen consort to publish under her own name in English, and her texts, infused with both theological reflection and personal experience, opened the door for women to enter religious discourse and public intellectual life. She modeled for future generations how women could think, write, and lead with authority, without losing their identity in the shadow of powerful husbands or patriarchal institutions. Catherine's influence extended beyond religion and literature. Her relationship with Elizabeth, the future queen, was one of the most important aspects of her legacy. In a period where royal children were often left to tutors and caretakers, Catherine assumed a direct and nurturing role in Elizabeth's education and development. She ensured the young princess received a rigorous humanist education, encouraging her mastery of languages, classical texts, and Protestant theology. These seeds bore fruit in Elizabeth's reign, one marked by intellectual flourishing, religious moderation, and an image of queenship that owed much to Catherine's example. Indeed, Catherine Parr was a living model of the intelligent, literate, and religiously committed female ruler. Although she never wielded power as a queen regnant, her role as queen consort and stepmother gave her a platform from which to shape the nation's future. Her experience balancing the expectations of the Tudor court, managing a blended royal family, and surviving the whims of one of history's most mercurial kings prepared Elizabeth to lead England through its own trials: foreign threats, religious division, and political rebellion. But Catherine's life was not only one of public contribution. At its core, her story is also deeply personal, a tale of a woman who endured personal sorrow, political constraint, and dangerous proximity to power. She was widowed multiple times, forced into a politically advantageous marriage with a capricious and aging king, and finally, after years of subservience, found love with Thomas Seymour. That final marriage brought her both joy and ultimately death. Her death from childbed fever, so soon after the birth of her long-desired daughter Mary, is a poignant reminder of how fragile even the most powerful women's lives were in Tudor England. Despite all her achievements, Catherine could not escape the biological risks that defined womanhood in the 16th century. Her infant daughter, Mary Seymour, disappeared from historical records shortly after Catherine's death, her fate unknown, lost to time like so many women whose lives were deemed peripheral to the grand narrative of kings and wars. Yet Catherine herself was never truly forgotten. Over the centuries, historians, writers, and feminists have rediscovered her. They have looked beyond the reductive narrative of the one who survived, and uncovered the contours of a woman who was far more than the wife of a tyrant. Today, Catherine Parr stands as a figure of strength, education, and thoughtful conviction. Her life invites us to reconsider what power looks like. Not always loud or dramatic, but steady, patient, and deeply rooted in principle. In her books, she gave voice to her soul. In her marriage to Henry VIII, she showed courage. In her guardianship of Elizabeth, she sowed the seeds of a golden age. And in her quiet resistance against the norms that limited women, she became a quiet revolutionary, one who made space for intellect, for faith, and for female leadership in an unforgiving world. Her contributions remind us that power can be exerted not only through armies or laws, but through ideas, education, and personal integrity. She proved that women could write their own stories, even in times that tried to silence them. Through her printed words and personal example, Catherine Parr offered an enduring legacy, not just as a queen, but as a woman of learning, compassion, and vision. Catherine Parr's journey from noblewoman to twice-widowed bride, queen consort, reformist writer, stepmother, and finally a mother in her own right, reveals the quiet heroism of a woman who endured and shaped the volatile world of Tudor England. Her influence radiated far beyond her lifetime, echoing in the reign of Elizabeth I and in the long, unfinished struggle for women's intellectual and spiritual autonomy. In Catherine's life, we see not only survival but triumph. Her story, like the woman herself, demands to be remembered not in passing, but